Begin the current Daf Mesech the Sukkah Daf Lamed Alv. Begin the second line down for the top of the Amud, where the Gemara continues on the theme of the previous Daf we were discussing regarding stealing from land, as we spoke about the Avankiri, the story with those peddlers who they would, when they're taking the Hadassim, should not cut off themselves. So we continue on the theme regarding stealing, and relates to land, but in regards to a different context of Allah, not of Hadassim, but to that of the Sukkah Gezula. She's corresponds to Bakazich and the Cheskel 20 Daf Hashem B'Shem is joining us for today's Daf. Should be Schus B'Tindik Ben Yehudis. Something to discuss in today's Daf are the status of a stolen Sukkah. And interesting, when must a thief return the stolen object? And when does a thief just repay its value, but he could actually keep the stolen object? Do a lulav and esrog need to be hadar, according to Rabbi Yehuda? The halach of adding or subtracting from the fourth species. So the key terms of concept discussed are ksusi mechta shireha. There's halacha that when something has to be burnt, it's like pulverized, like as if it has no measurement of how large it's supposed to be. Takanas Marish is a rabbinic injunction that when someone steals a crossbeam, that he doesn't have to rip it out of his whole house and destroy the whole structure. He could just return the value so that it'll invest him to do tshuva. Hekesh is when you have something near another topic in the same pasuk that would compare the two ideas. Baltaisiv is the halacha that one shouldn't increase on the mitzvahs itself. And hadar bilon mishan lashon is an interesting interpretation from pre-Eitz hadar. It doesn't mean hadar like in beauty. It actually means hadar. The actual root is the word dar, which is dwelling. Hadar, that dwells in the tree from year to year, to stay there the whole year. So begin the current Daf Lamanal, the second line down at the top of the Yom. And Tarbalina Braisa, Sukkah Gezula, a stolen Sukkah. And case number 2, Vamasachich B'Shasarabim, someone who makes a Sukkah in the public domain, which as Rashi points out is also stealing from people, because that street, that sidewalk is not yours. So we have a machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer Paisel, says a puzzle is Sukkah, V'cham Machshim, the Chum say it's valid. So this machlekes, Amr Rav Nachman, he qualifies, and he says the whole machlekes that Rabbi Eliezer says is going to be invalid is b'shetoikif es chaver. We're talking about when you grab somebody, v'hitzim misukasai, and you forcibly take him out of his sukkah, which is built on the land of the guy who you kicked out of his own sukkah, and whatever is attached to the ground, which is what a sukkah is, has the halacha like the ground itself. So what's the machlekes? For Rabbi Eliezer goes according to his reasoning, Dama that he said, we quote this in the Chavzayin Mabeis. He holds, a person could not fulfill his obligation in his friend's sukkah. That's why he said on Daf Chavzayin, a sukkah shul, a borrowed sukkah, you're not able to fulfill your obligation. So this sukkah, when you take the guy, you literally pull him out of his sukkah and you sit in his sukkah, memanav shach is going to be possible. Why? As the Gemara explains. If on land it could have a status of being stolen, like other movable items, in other words, to then go and change possessions and be in the possession of the one who's stealing it, so what is it? It's sukkah gezulahi. It's a stolen sukkah. Now Rabbi Eliezer expounds on Daf Chavzayin. It says chag sukkahs tasalach, sukkahs you should make lach mishalach, has to be yours and not stolen and not borrowed. So okay, so it's a sukkah gezulahi. It's not going to be yetzer because it's stolen. And even if you're going to hold the land cannot be stolen, so therefore that means all the days of sukkahs it's in the domain of its real owner. So sukkah shu'ulihi comes out, you didn't steal it because you can't steal land, and the sukkah is connected to land, so you didn't steal anything. So it's like a borrowed, and he holds that chag sukkahs taslach has to be yours. You're not yetzer whether it could be stolen or not. Because Rashi points out, there is a mandam that holds karka could be stolen, which because he expounds riboy and mid, and there's a mandam holds karka cannot be stolen because he expounds the psukim over there, klal prat. But be that as it may, whichever one you hold, if karka in exels or not in exels, according to Eliezer, you're not going to be yetzer. Whereas V'Rabbanon, the reason why they say it's going to be valid if you sit in this guy's sukkah, you kicked him out, you pulled him out, and you sit in his sukkah, is a tamei. They're going according to their reasoning, which is based on really two principles. Damri, they say, first of all, they hold you could fulfill your obligation in your friend's sukkah, as they learned on Daf Chavzayin from Kol Ezrach. Kol Ezrach Yeshu B'Sukkahs, we said that they could all sit in one sukkah. How's that possible that you can't all be partners in the same sukkah? So you could fulfill it in someone else's sukkah. So you could fulfill it in a borrowed sukkah. And they hold V'Karkei in Nigzelis. Land cannot be stolen, which that's the Rabbanan brought in Parak HaGoizl and Baba Kama, that the whole land cannot be stolen. So they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer also in the fact that land cannot be stolen, so therefore, v'sukkah shulihi. So it comes out it's a borrowed sukkah, and the borrowed sukkah you can fulfill your obligation. So the Rabbanan would say it's kosher is based on two principles. One is land cannot be stolen, so it's borrowed, and they hold that from Kol Ezrach that you could fulfill your obligation of borrowed sukkah. So that's the machlekes regarding this case of a sukkah gzula. Because what do you mean that this is the case they're disagreeing about? Because says the Gemara, the classic case you would think of a gazal eitz of a sichir ben. Let's say you stole somebody's wood. and you made a sukkah out of it. Rashi explains this is not considered not a sukkah gzula and not a sukkah she'ula. Why? Rashi actually gives two different reasons why. Either because you acquired the wood by what's called shinamai, so you did something with it, you made a sukkah out of it, so you changed it from its original form, or shina Hashem, it's not just a piece of wood now anymore, it's called a sukkah. Or a different reason Rashi gives, actually because of takanas hashavim, as the Gemara is going to shortly elaborate on. Takana means the institution of hashavim, of those to do tshuva. You don't have to destroy your structure to give back the wood that you stole when the whole sukkah is built on that. Rather, in this case, everyone's going to agree, the original owner, only you have to give him back the monetary value of what you stole from him, which therefore it's considered your sukkah because you own it. You just have to give him back the value. Rashi says the Gemara in Perkei Yoshin said that Rabbanan agreed that a sukkah gzul is going to be possible. So Rashi explains it's not talking about when you steal a sukkah that's attached to the ground, and it's not talking about when you steal wood and you make a sukkah out of it, because the case of both of those they hold is valid. Because the sukkah gezula, we said, it cannot be stolen, it's shol, and they hold it valid. And regarding stealing wood and making schach out of it, a sukkah out of it is also okay because of the takanas hashavim. Rather, talking about where you stole a sukkah on top of a wagon or on top of a boat, where that's not mechubal karka because it's on a movable item. Where there the sukkah could be stolen because it's not attached to the ground. And then you cannot just give back the monies because you didn't just steal a beam, you stole the whole sukkah. So it's no tircha for you to go ahead. You didn't put in the effort to build it, and you didn't make any expenses. That's the case of sukkah gzul. The Rabbanan agree to. It would be specifically that case that's a sukkah gzul that you wouldn't fulfill the obligation. But if you steal wood and you make a sukkah out of it, everyone agrees that you're going to be yaitzi. Says the Gemara. Okay, that's how Rav Nachman qualified this machlekes that we started off the daf with. On that, the Gemara is explaining, Mimai, from where do you know that their machlekes is regarding when you're stealing the land, which again, there's hold you cannot steal land, and that the reason why they hold it's kosher is because now it's considered as a borrowed sukkah, because it's really his, because you can't steal it, which according to the Chacham, you fulfill your obligation. I'll tell you why. Because there were two cases we spoke about, sukkah gzula and mesachik b'shas rabim. Midigtani dum in the Rishus Rabim, from the fact that we compared a stolen sukkah to making a sukkah in the Rishus Rabim when you're taking over on 13th Avenue and you move your sukkah over, taking over the whole sidewalk, and the officer is going to say, "Hey, sir, why do you have your sukkah out there on the sidewalk?" You're going to say, because my Rishus Rabim, just like the Rishus Rabim, Karka Lavdi Dehu, the land is not his. So sukkah nami, also the sukkah is Lav Karka Dehu. It's not his own land. That's exactly what we're saying, because we're considering it as that person's land, because the sukkah is attached to the land, and therefore it was going to qualify not as a sukkah gzula, but as a sukkah she'ula. And again, the Rabban hold a borrowed sukkah, you can fulfill your obligation. Actually, the Gemara brings an interesting story. Ahi Sabsa, there was this elderly lady that the slaves of the Resh Galusa, who's in charge of the Jews in diaspora, like the mayor of all the Jews, they stole from her wood and they made a sukkah out of it. She came for the Rav Nachman complaining. Amar Lehi, she said to him, Resh Galusa, the mayor of all the Jews, all the rabbis, the Be'esh Galusa that come to his house, to his sukkah, but sukkah gzula, they're all sitting in the stolen sukkah. The slaves stole the wood from me. So Tzavcha, so she was screaming that she wanted the wood back. Rav Nachman didn't pay any attention to her. Amar Lehi, so she said to him, Itza dehavale lavu, a woman that her father, which she was actually referring to Avram Avinu, had talas meya betam nisrei avdi, had 313 slaves, which as the Torah says, Yilide Beisai, which some say refers to Eliezer, but it was 318 servants that he had. It's Tzavcha Kamecha screaming in front of you, Vlashkechisa, but you're not paying any attention to her? So Rav Nachman said to his Talmidim around him, he says, Pa'isahida. This woman is a what's called a kalanis. She's a screamer, this one. She's one of those histrionic types. She doesn't get it, she's not getting her wood back. She only gets the monetary value of the wood back because that was to the Kanz Chachamim. If you have a beam that's stolen that you built into your structure, the one you stole from only gets the monies. You don't have to destroy the whole structure to get back that piece of wood because of the takanas hashavim, as the Gemara says again, Daf Yomi Aleph. And actually, moreover, the Gemara continues on this theme and actually says, Amar Ravina, he says, Haikashurta de metalalta de gezula. The cross beam of a stolen sukkah, Avdilo Rabbana Takanta. The Rabbanan made an institution that you only have to give the monetary values. Mishum Takantas Marsh, because of the institution of the crossbeam. In other words, and we don't say, what do you mean? It's not a great loss. This is just a sukkah. You could. It's not a house, not a mansion. On that we say no, because since the mitzvah of Sukkah is all 7 days, we say is like a binyan kavaz, like your house. This is your house right now, and therefore we don't obligate you to go ahead and destroy the Sukkah. Says Gemara, but Pshita, obviously, Mashnama Eitzim, why is it different than wood? In other words, we said before, if you steal wood and you make a sukkah out of it, we said everyone agrees that the nigzal, the one who was stolen from, only gets the monetary value. So what's the difference between that and the beam over here that we're talking about? So the Gemara says, no. What would you say? Eitzim shchichi, wood is commonly found that you could buy with money. So good. So if you built your sukkah with that wood, you're going to tell the guy, because of the Tikkun Shavim, we're not going to make the guy who stole have to undo the whole sukkah, because you could go ahead, go to the store, go to the market, right there you can get the wood. But when he steals a cross beam, that's not common. I would say that, what do you mean? You got to take apart your whole sukkah because I'm not going to be able to find this discontinued item, whatever it is. We're saying that no. Ultimately, when we want the guy to be able to do tshuva. If you're going to ask him to destroy his whole sukkah, he's not going to do tshuva, and therefore he only has to give you the monetary value. That's a chiddush in this case. Now, the Gemara, however, qualifies this teaching. It says, Hanimila, but when do we say this? That you don't have to take apart your sukkahs, but shiva, only within the 7 days of sukkahs. Avalabasa the shiva, but after the 7 days of sukkahs, hadabein, you got to give it back as it is. You got to take apart the sukkah and give him back his beam. Now, but if you connected it with cement, then it's like any other permanent structure. Then even after 7 days, then you only have to give him back the monetary value. You don't have to give him back the beam. Now, going back to the halach of our Mishnah, we had mentioned regarding a lulav hayavish, regarding a dry lulav. So we said in our Mishnah that a dry lulav is pasul. Actually, the Gemara brings it as a machlekes. Tana, we learned in the Brisa. Yavish, the Tana Kama says yes, like in our Mishnah, pasul, it's invalid. And Rabbi Yehuda Machshir, Rabbi Yehuda says a dry lulav is valid. So Amar Rav, he qualifies, and he says, machlekes b'lulav, this machlekes is specifically by a lulav. Why? The Rabbanan Sarbi, they hold makshin and lulav l'estrig. We compare as the same pasuk says, which the estrig is the lulav and the hadasim and the ravas. So in the same pasuk it mentions lulav with estrig. So we compare, as a hekesh is in the same pasuk, lulav to estrig. Ma hestrig by a hadar, just like estrig, as the pasuk says, pre-eitz hadar, has to be beautiful. Af lulav by a hadar, so too, a lulav has to be beautiful, dried out. It's not beautiful. No, we don't compare lulav to esrig, which Rashi says because you cannot expound your own from the Yid Gimel Midrash Atar and Drash Behen, which is a hekesh. You can't make it up on your own. It's only something that you have a Messiah to. Only Kavachem is the one that accepts. Tais disagrees. Tais says actually all of them you could, just not Xer Shava. Here it's from a Svara, he says you wouldn't say this hekesh because a fruit makes sense to say hadar. A lulav, what type of hadar? It's a branch. If you think about it, everyone looks at us like we're a little bit wacky. We're looking at this like branch and we're so that's the machlekes regarding if you would say hadar or not, if you makash it or not. So that's the machlekes regarding lulav. The estrig, but regarding estrig, dibak kol hadar, and everyone would agree that it has to be hadar because it says hadar. And the chiddush in that is, of course, it says hadar, is that no, Rabbi Yehuda does not expound the word hadar as the word eder, which is a Greek word, which is how Ben Azi actually on Daf Lamed Hey Manaf expounds, and rather it means hadar as the beauty. So therefore, that's how the Rav is qualifying that the machlekes is specifically around lulav. If you compare it to esrog or not, but esrog, of course, needs hadar, as the pasuk says, pre-eitz hadar. On that the Gemara says, is that really so? B'lulav le'boy Rabbi Yehuda hadar. That by lulav, however, Rabbi Yehuda does not require hadar. But what's now learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that by nifredu olav, when the branches were separated, yagdenim el-mala. The Tanakh says kasher. Rabbi Yehuda says no, you should tie it on the top. Says the Gemara, my time. What's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to tie on the top? Lam mishum debay hadar is because he needed to be beautiful, and so you see he needs hadar by the lulav. Says the Gemara, that's not the reason why. It's kediktani time as the reason actually says. Rabbi Yehuda mishum Reb Tarfon, he says, it says the pasuk b'yikra kapos tamarim. Now, literally we translate kapos tamarim as the palm branch, but the word kapos is kafus, is bound. Meaning, if it was separated, you should tie it together. That's how he knows. Not because it has to be hadar, because of kapos that has to be bound. Says Gemara, is that really so? That really does not require hadar by the lulav to be beautiful. But what's not in the Mishnah later on, the Tanakh, the Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein oigden es lulav." You're not supposed to bind the lulav, meaning all the three minim, the lulav, hadasim, and the ravas together. It has to be from the same species. You got to use like we use the lulavim branches. That's the Rabbi Yehuda. So my time, why does he hold you have to bind it together with lulav branches? Lamasham de bayahada isn't because you need it to be beautiful, because if it's something else, it doesn't look as harmonious when it's some other entity. So you see that he requires hada? It's like, that's not the reason. No, Rabbi says, I feel a sieve. You could even use the bast that grows around the palm tree, which gets wrapped around it, similar to why ivy is around a vineyard by a grapevine. That's you could even use the branch of the tree itself. So even though the colors don't even look the same color as the lulav, as long as it's from the same species, because the reason for Rabbi Yehuda is not because of hada being beautiful, it's rather, as the Gemara says, so why does Rabbi Yehuda all has to be from the same species? If it's not even going to be looking nice, it's actually going to be off color, so then why does it have to be from the same species? So the Gemara, because Rabbi Yehuda hold lulav tzarich eket. The lulav has to be bound together, so therefore whatever is bound together with it is part of the mitzvah. If you might see minachina, and if you bring a different species, then it's going to be 5 different minim, and you're going to be over baltaisiv if you're going to be binding together with some other species because you have something else. If this binding is something else, then you have all bound together. You're going to have a 5th min, and that's why, but not because of hada. So that was the questions that we had regarding that we thought he was going to say that lulav needs hadar. We said no, he doesn't need hadar. But now the Gemara asked the other way around. Is it really true, like Rava had qualified, that by esrog, however, he holds that it does have to be hadar? In the brayso, arbas minim shabalulav, the 4 minim in the lulav, kshem shem peichsim, just like you're not allowed to diminish the 4 species, kachem ma'isiv, and so you're not allowed to add on to them. Now, leimatz esrog, what happens if you don't find an esrog? Lo yavi, you shouldn't bring leiparish, not a quince, leirima, not a pomegranate, leidovacha, nothing else. It's got to be just the esrog. Now, kamushin, if let's say it's withered, so ksherin that's going to be kosher, it's just a little bit like worn out. But yavation, if it's totally dried out, that's a machlekes. That the Tanakh says psulin. Yehuda he says no af yavation, even if it's dried, it's going to be kosher. And Yehuda says, as we continue, Maisa, there's a story as we continue to Amid Beis, B'bnei Krachin, people who lived in the inner city, which they don't live where there's orchards and there's no palm trees available to them. That they actually bequeathed their lulavim to their grandchildren because no one had lulavim, which obviously Rabbi Yehuda was showing that you see it's dried out because it was there for many generations. So obviously you see that a dried out is okay. Which Amrullah, they said to him as the Girsa, Mishram Raya, from there's a proof. Ain't Shas Atchak Raya. In a pressing situation, not a proof. You don't have. But of course, initially we're not going to say that's going to be valid. But one thing says the Gemara Getanimi, as we learned Rabbi Yehuda, he says Avivation Ksherin, that even if it's dried, it's kosher. My love, isn't it telling us that esrog, that it's going on the case of the esrog, and that you don't need to have hadr even on the esrog because it was from generation the zayda you inherited the esrog. Obviously it's dried out. So Allah, now it's going on the case of lulav. It's going on lulav, that lulav he held that could be dried out because he doesn't hold it has to be hadr. But the esrog he holds it does have to be hadr. Now, Amamah, the Gemara just goes back what we had said in passing because we wanted to use it as a question. We quoted this price that said, Shem Shem Peichsim, just like you're not allowed to go ahead and use less than the 4 minim, so you're not allowed to use more than that. It says, Mapshita, obviously. We know that this is the 4 species. It says, what would you say, since Rabbi says, the lulav has to be bound, you have to tie it together. And if you bring a different species and you don't bind it together, so this is separate. This is separate, meaning it's not going to be put into the binding. So you would have thought to say that's not going to be Isser Bal Teisa because not together. Kamashal is saying that no, since you're taking it together, that will be a problem about Bal Teisa, even though it's not bind together. Also, Amamar, we had said there in the Brisa that Leimatza Esrig, let's say you don't find the Esrig, you shouldn't bring Leirima, not a pomegranate, Leiparish, not a quince, nothing else. Obviously, it's not an Esrig. How can you think you take an apple instead of an Esrig? Says what would you say, Laisi, that you should bring that other thing, let's say a lemon? That people shouldn't forget that there's such a halach of taking esrog. There's no esrogim in this town for hundreds of years. Everyone's going to be taking 3 minutes. I don't think that's so. There's no such halach of esrog. So you would think you should take that lemon to remember this halacha. That's what I'm saying. That no, zimnid enough equivalent. It actually might make a destructive element because the aslam is people might actually come to get used to this, and they might think, why do you have to pay for esrog hundreds of dollars? What do you mean? By instant shtibam of lemon. What's the problem? Right? So because of that, we say no. We'd rather if you don't have an esrog, don't use anything because you can be worse off if you do. Tashma, the Gemara continues regarding this idea about Rabbi Yehuda, that he had said that Esrig Rava has said for Rabbi Yehuda, this that he holds that you don't have to have hadar is only regarding the lulav. But Esrig requires hadar, so the Gemara tries to bring a right Tashma. The Gemara says clearly not like Rava, because the Bride says Esrig Hayashin, the old Esrig, which means dried out. The Tanakhama says pasul. For Rabbi Yehuda Mach, Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. So you have to do the Gemara says clearly it's a refutation of Rava, because Rava had said that Rabbi Yehuda only doesn't require hadar by lulav, but by Esrog he does. You see clearly Bryce says definitively that he doesn't require hadar even by esrog. So the Gemara says, "V'loy by hadar." Rabbi Yehuda doesn't require hadar by an esrog. How can you say that? Now we learn in the Mishnah later on Daf Lamed Beis that an esrog that's hayarik kakarti, that's green like leek. Rabbi Meir Machshir. Meir says, okay, a green esrog is okay, but Rabbi Yehuda says not valid. Says he, green esrog does a shine esrog. This is not nice. You're going to come to shul with this green esrog? Isn't it because you need hadar? Says he, it's not the reason. The reason is because it's not fully matured yet, so it's not considered an esrog yet. Not because of the color. Green just shows you that it didn't fully mature. That's why. But it doesn't have to be hadar. Tashma the Gemara tries to bring another raya. The Mishnah over there says, shir esrog cotton. What's the measurement of a small esrog? How small could it be? Me'am is literally the size of a walnut. Yehuda says, no, it has to be as long as it's the size of an egg. Says Gemara, isn't it because he holds that if it's so small, it's not beautiful? It's like it looks like a matchbox thing. It does so because you require hadar. Says no, that's again that's because it didn't fully mature. It's too small, but not because it lacks beauty, but because you don't have that beauty according to Rabbi Yehuda. So it brings another right. Tashema. It says over there in that same Mishnah, how big could it be? That's about how small. How big could it be? The Yehuda says it could be as big as if you could hold two estrogim in one hand. So it can't be bigger than half the size of a hand. He says, no, I feel those big estrogim, you get the pictures every year, they show you this guy's coming to the Kaisel with estrog that he needs 3 people to hold it. He says, even if one estrog that takes 2 hands to hold it, he says, even that is going to be kasha. But Al Kapanim, we see Rabbi Yehuda holds that, no, you have to have that you could fit 2 of them in your hand. My time, what's the reason? It isn't because you need it to be beautiful, and if you have such a big thing, it's not a beautiful thing. This is journamis. This is like a little bit like a mutant. It's not something that's nice. So that's not the reason why. I'll tell you why. It's a very interesting reason. Since Rabbi said lulav b'yamin v'esrog b'yisrael, we know that the lulav has to be in the right hand, and the esrog has to be in the left hand. Why? Because the lulav has 3 mitzvahs on it. It has the lulav, the hadas, and the rava. Esrog is only 1 mitzvah, so the more chashav one, which has 3, goes in the right hand. Now, sometimes a person might switch the order. He might have, by mistake, the esrog in the right hand and the lulav in the left hand. Now, va'osti lafachinu, so he's going to have to switch it from hand to hand. He's going to have to hold the esrog and the lulav in one of the 2 hands at the same time, because anyone knows anything by switching, besides little kids who end up dropping both of the ice creams on the floor, you have to end up holding both in one hand if you want to switch hands. You can't switch unless you're juggling. So the problem is, if it's too big, it's going to fall out of your hands. V'aslav suli, it's going to come to be invalidated because you're going to get a hole in it. So that's what it means when you have to have shnayim biyada achas. You have to be able to hold 2 esrogim in one hand. It means because in the place of where the other esrog would fit, that's where you're going to put the lulav when you're switching hands. So that's the reason why. It's a very pragmatic reason, because we're just afraid it might be dropped, but not because of hadar. And therefore, we don't have any raya that Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to have hadar. But then the Gemara, the last question asked, but Rabbi Yehuda haksiv hadar? How can you say you don't need to have hadar? It's a pasuk in the Torah. I don't care what lamdus you're saying, but Torah says priyat hadar. So the Gemara, no, who? That's not hadar. Medav line the Chassid hadar, not hadar. Hadar beilon mishon l'shana. That if it dwells in the tree from year to year, because actually Rashi says from here we know. How do you know it means esrog? Maybe it means any other fruits. A beautiful fruit. I can show you many beautiful fruits. You know how you know it's an esrog? Because there's no other fruit that stays on the tree from year to year. It's only the esrog, and that's how we know it's an esrog, because it doesn't refer to hadar. It's hadar. Hey is a prefix. The word is dar, that dwells. It dwells on the tree from year to year. That's what it's actually referring to. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda does not require the halach of hadar. It could be old oiskid tzvik in the esrog, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Right. So there's different sources of how we know, right, the esrog, right, yeah. But it could be they also would learn both things, but they also learn that it's referring to hadar. That means it has to be. But we'll see later on that there are other drushes of how to expand the word hadar. Then the Mishnah said a lulav shel ashera of that was worshipped by avodah zarah, of a shalom nedachas, of a whole city that did avodah zarah in that city. So those branches of the palm trees are going to be pasul. So the Gemara asks, shel ashera pasul? Is that really so in the avodah zarah tree that the branches are pasul to be used as a lulav? Rav had said lulav shel avodah zarah. Lulav that they used for avodah zarah, either let's say they swept in front of it with like a broom, or would they actually worship it with a lulav, like they would pass it in front of it or throw it by the avodah zarah. So halach is lo yitel. You shouldn't use that for your lulav, because it's disgusting to use avodah zarah for Hashem. But if you did use it as a lulav kosher, it's going to be valid. What do you mean avodah zarah is isur hana forbidden to have benefit? So Rashi explains mitzvahs lav lahanis nitnu. Mitzvahs weren't given to have benefit. In other words, the kiyum of the mitzvah is not pleasure for the body. It's like a servant worshiping his master. It's not considered I'm having hana, so it's not a violation of isur hana. So therefore, it's going to be kosher. So wait a second, how can you say it's kosher? I thought you said in the Mishnah shalosh she'er is going to be puzzle. Is it kosher or is it puzzle? So it's not difficulty. In our Mishnah is ba'asher de Moshe. We're talking about those Asherah trees that were there when the Klal Yisrael conquered Eretz Yisrael right after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, where the pasuk requires that they have to be burnt, as the pasuk in Varim Yud Beis. Vashireim tisrafin be'esh. Now, a lulav has a minimum measurement that has to be, as we explained in the Mishnah. So this lulav is like as if the chesusim mechtash, as if its measurement is pulverized, because since it's meant to be burnt, we view it as if it's burnt already. And when something burnt, it's like ashes, so it's not going to have a minimum measurement. And therefore, that doesn't contradict what Rav is saying, regular avodah zarah, yeah, you would be Yetzah. And they can have Niktani, and a precise reading of our Mishnah indicates this, because Dumi Dir and Nedach, what's the other case we say in the Mishnah? We compare it to the rejected city that they all did avodah zarah, which Allah is you have to burn that whole city. Shema Minah, obviously the reason why it's invalid is because it has to be burnt. And since it's to be burnt, we view it already as if it's burnt, which is pulverized, and therefore it doesn't have a shiur, and therefore it's possible. But regular avodah zarah, yeah, it doesn't have the halacha has to be burnt. It's only over there, by when they came into Eretz Yisrael, that they had to go ahead and burn everything. And therefore, a regular avodah zarah branch would be valid, in contrast to that in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Mishnah then went on to say that niktim roishai, which is that if the... okay, thank you to Anytime for hosting us. We'll